After a long drive, Devin Carter finally pulled into the packed parking lot of Ridgeway Plaza, relieved to have a break. It had been a stressful week, and all he wanted was a quiet lunch with his sister before heading back to work. As he turned off the engine, he adjusted his collar, took a deep breath, and stepped out of his car, letting the warm autumn air wash over him. Just as he locked the door and took a few steps toward the restaurant, a strange, uneasy feeling crept in. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a woman striding toward him with sharp, determined steps. Her crisp navy dress, designer handbag, and perfectly styled blonde bob gave off an air of polished authority, but it was the intensity in her eyes that set off alarms in his mind. Meredith Vaughn was well known in town, though not for reasons anyone would admire. Her family owned several businesses in the area, and she never missed an opportunity to remind people of her influence. People tolerated her, but many whispered about her overbearing nature and tendency to push boundaries. Today, she looked especially irate. "Excuse me," she called out, stopping just a few feet away. Her voice was sharp, her tone clipped. She folded her arms, glancing at his car before locking eyes with him. "Did you really think parking here was appropriate?" Devin blinked, momentarily thrown off by the hostility in her voice. He glanced back at his car, perfectly parked within the lines like every other vehicle nearby. "I don't see a problem," he said, keeping his tone polite. "Is there an issue?" Meredith's lips curled into a smirk, but her eyes remained cold. "Oh, it's not just about parking," she sneered. "You people think you can just show up wherever you want, take up space, like you belong here." There it was, that tone, that unspoken venom. Devin's chest tightened. He had seen this play out before. He clenched his jaw but kept his voice steady. "I'm just here to meet someone for lunch," he said. "If my car is in your way, I'll move it. I don't want any trouble." Meredith scoffed, waving his words away. "Trouble? You're already causing trouble just by being here," she said, her voice growing louder. A few passers-by turned their heads, their curiosity piqued by the commotion. Devin took a slow breath, steadying himself. He knew that pushing back would only confirm whatever narrative she had already written in her mind. He had been taught to stay calm, to de-escalate, to walk away if necessary. But something in her tone, in the way she spat those words so openly, so shamelessly, made it clear. She wanted him to feel small, and that was something he refused to accept. Devin's fingers curled into his palms, the weight of the moment pressing against him. He had dealt with situations like this before, thinly veiled hostility wrapped in a condescending smile. But something about Meredith's boldness, the way she made no effort to hide her disgust, made his stomach twist. He kept his voice measured. "Ma'am, I don't understand why this is an issue. I park just like everyone else." Meredith let out a short, exaggerated laugh, shaking her head. "Of course you don't understand. People like you never do," she said, folding her arms. "You come into places like this without a second thought about how uncomfortable you make the rest of us." A few feet away, a man pausing by his car frowned slightly, shifting his gaze between them. Further down the row, a woman with a shopping bag slowed her steps, sensing the tension. Devin could feel the eyes gathering, the weight of their silent curiosity pressing in. He took a breath, forcing his shoulders to stay relaxed. "Ma'am, I'm just here for lunch. If I've done something to offend you, I assure you it wasn't intentional." Meredith scoffed. "Offend me? Oh, no, no, no. This isn't about me." She gestured around dramatically. "It's about respect. This is a respectable establishment, and some of us don't feel safe with certain people lingering around." The words hit Devin like a slap. His jaw tightened, a flash of heat rising in his chest. He had heard this kind of rhetoric before, dressed up in coded language meant to sound reasonable, but there was nothing subtle about the way she said it. For a split second, he considered walking away, just turning around and leaving, letting her bask in whatever victory she thought she had won. But why should he have to be the one to walk away? More people had started to notice now, some pretending to check their phones while stealing glances. A teenage boy across the lot held up his phone, angling it toward them. Recording. Devin exhaled slowly, his heartbeat steady but strong. He knew how this worked. He knew the fine line he was forced to walk. One wrong move, one raised voice, and suddenly he would be the problem. So instead, he held his ground. Meredith's expression twisted with frustration, her eyes scanning Devon's face as if daring him to challenge her. When he didn't flinch, when he simply stood there, calm, steady, refusing to shrink under her glare, something in her snapped. "You people never know your place," she muttered under her breath. Then before he could react, she slapped him. The impact was sharp, a stinging heat spreading across Devon's cheek. The small but undeniable sound of the slap cut through the noise of the parking lot like a gunshot. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to freeze. A stunned silence settled over the crowd. The teenage boy recording let out a quiet, startled gasp. A man near the restaurant entrance turned fully toward them, brows furrowed in disbelief. Devon barely moved, his body locked in place, his hands still at his sides, his fingers trembling from the restraint. His mind screamed at him to do something, to react, to defend himself. But he already knew how this played out. He had been raised to understand that his reaction mattered more than the attack itself, that no one would see the slap. They would only see what came after. His jaw clenched, the heat in his chest building, but his feet stayed planted. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction, but she wasn't done. Meredith took a step closer, her face alight with something disturbingly close to satisfaction. "What? No smart response now?" she sneered. "Nothing to say?" The teenage boy holding his phone kept recording, his hands shaking slightly. The woman from earlier had pulled out her own phone now. Someone whispered, "Did she just hit him?" The moment stretched, fragile and loaded with unspoken weight. And then, before Devon could say a word, a firm hand clamped down on his shoulder from behind. A firm hand clamped down on Devon's shoulder, yanking him out of his daze. He turned, heart pounding, and found himself face to face with Officer Mark Trent. The off-duty cop stood stiffly, his expression unreadable, but there was something cold in his eyes. "Sir, you're coming with me," Trent said, his grip tightening. Devon blinked, struggling to process what was happening. "Wait, what?" "She hit me." His voice was steady, but the frustration was creeping in. "I didn't do anything." Trent didn't even look at Meredith. He just shook his head, his tone flat. "I saw you raise your hand." Devon felt his stomach drop. "Are you kidding me?" He turned toward the small crowd that had gathered. "You all saw what just happened. She hit me." Meredith folded her arms, her smirk returning as she shifted her weight onto one hip. "Well," she said, her voice dripping with mock innocence, "I felt threatened. He was getting aggressive." A murmur rippled through the bystanders. Some looked uncomfortable, glancing at each other. Others just stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The teenage boy recording the scene hesitated, his fingers hovering over his phone. David Vaughn, Meredith's own son, had captured everything. He had always known his mother could be cruel, but this was different. He had seen her cross lines before, but never like this. Devon exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Officer, just look at the footage," he said, motioning toward David. "He has it all on video." Trent didn't even glance in the boy's direction. "Turn around," he ordered. "Hands behind your back." Devon clenched his jaw. He knew there was no winning this. Not here. Not now. The wrong move, the wrong tone, and he wouldn't just be leaving in handcuffs. He'd be leaving in the back of a patrol car, or worse. So swallowing the rage building inside him, he slowly turned around and put his hands behind his back. Trent grabbed his wrists and snapped the cuffs on tight. The cold metal bit into his skin, but Devon barely registered it. His mind was already racing, trying to figure out how he was going to explain this. To his sister, to his family, to himself. As Trent led him toward the parking lot exit, Devon caught one last glimpse of Meredith. She stood there smug, satisfied, completely unbothered. But a few feet away, David still held his phone up, still recording. His fingers trembled, his expression torn. For the first time, he wasn't just embarrassed by his mother. He was ashamed. The crowd had started to thin, people shifting uncomfortably before slipping back into their daily routines. But not Emma Caldwell. The 70-year-old woman stood near the curb, her hands gripping the strap of her purse, her lips pressed into a tight line. She had seen a lot in her lifetime, some things she wished she could forget. But this? Watching a young man get arrested for being the victim? It was too much. She pulled out her phone and quickly dialed a number. "Jackson, it's me," she said, her voice steady but laced with quiet fury. Her nephew, Jackson Caldwell, was a civil rights attorney in the city. He had dedicated his career to fighting cases just like this, but Emma had never called him like this before. "Auntie? What's wrong?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. "I just watched something awful," she said, glancing back at the parking lot. Trent was pushing Devin into the patrol car now, while Meredith stood a few feet away, arms crossed, looking pleased with herself. "A young man, didn't do a thing wrong, got slapped by some entitled woman. Then a cop put him in cuffs like he was the one at fault." Jackson exhaled sharply. "Did anyone record it?" Emma's gaze landed on David Vaughn, still gripping his phone, his face pale and uncertain. "Yeah," she said, nodding to herself. "I think someone did." "Get their contact," Jackson said, his voice firm now. "I'm on my way." Emma ended the call and tucked her phone back into her purse. Then, without hesitation, she marched straight toward David. "Son," she said gently, lowering her voice so only he could hear, "I saw you recording. You know what happened was wrong, and I think you do too." David swallowed hard, eyes darting between his mother and the patrol car. His fingers clenched around his phone. Emma held his gaze. "That man needs someone in his corner. Are you willing to help?" David took a shaky breath, and then slowly he nodded. Officer Sarah Daniels had barely stepped into the station when she noticed something was off. The usual background hum of chatter and ringing phones felt different, tenser. A few officers exchanged glances as she walked past, their expressions unreadable. She had only been back from her day off for a few minutes when she overheard Officer Mark Trent talking about an aggressive suspect in holding. Something about his tone didn't sit right. "Tell me about the man in holding," she said, keeping her voice neutral. Trent barely looked up from his paperwork. Another hothead who thought he could get away with disrespecting a woman. He shrugged, dismissing it as if it were routine. Nothing more to say. Sarah frowned. She had been on the force long enough to recognize when something didn't add up. "And the woman?" she pressed. Trent sighed, clearly annoyed. Meredith Vaughn, local business owner, claimed she felt threatened. Sarah didn't like the sound of that. She grabbed the case file from Trent's desk and scanned it. The details were thin, vague. No mention of injuries, no witness statements, no reference to video evidence. Just a single narrative written to make Devin look guilty. That wasn't enough for her. A few minutes later, she was standing outside the holding cell. Devin sat on the bench, hands resting on his knees, staring at the floor. The swelling on his cheek was impossible to miss. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Carter," she said, keeping her tone even, "my name is Officer Daniels. I'd like to hear what happened, in your own words." Devin looked up, studying her face for a moment. He had no reason to trust her, no reason to believe she would be any different. But something about her expression, measured, calm, not dismissive, made him exhale and nod. As he spoke, Sarah listened carefully, noting every detail: the confrontation, the slap, the arrest, the way Trent ignored the footage. Her jaw tightened. She had dealt with bad policing before, but this was blatant. She didn't waste time. Within the hour, she had spoken to multiple witnesses. And when she found Emma Caldwell, the older woman didn't hesitate to share what she had seen. Emma pulled out her phone. "I didn't record it," she admitted, "but he did." Sarah followed her gaze and saw David Vaughn, standing near the station entrance, gripping his phone like a lifeline. Sarah walked over, her voice soft but firm. "David, I need to see that video." David hesitated. He looked back at his mother's name on the report, then at Sarah. "If I show you," he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, "does that mean the truth actually matters?" Sarah met his eyes. "That depends," she said. "Are you willing to help make it matter?" David swallowed hard. Then slowly he unlocked his phone and held it out. Sarah hit play, and within seconds the entire case unraveled. Sarah Daniels didn't waste time. The moment she finished watching the video, she knew this was bigger than just a wrongful arrest. It was about power, bias, and injustice. With the video evidence in hand, she confronted Officer Trent. His usual smug indifference faltered when she placed David's phone on his desk and hit play. There it was. Everything. The slap, Devin's restraint, the crowd's reaction, Trent ignoring the truth. Trent scoffed, leaning back in his chair. Come on, Daniels. You really think this is worth making a mess over? Sarah's jaw tightened. You arrested an innocent man because it was easier than questioning a privileged woman's lies. She picked up the case file and tossed it onto his desk. Fix this, now. Minutes later, Devin was released. As he stepped out of the station, he let out a slow breath, his body still carrying the weight of what had happened. His sister Maya was waiting for him, her arms crossed, worry etched into her face. The moment she saw him, she rushed forward, pulling him into a tight hug. I saw the video, she whispered. I can't believe this happened. Devin exhaled. I can. Nearby, Emma Caldwell and David Vaughn stood watching. David looked uneasy, like he wasn't sure where he fit into this. But when Devin's eyes met his, David lifted his phone slightly. I kept the original file, he said, if you need it. Devin nodded. I do. That night, with Jackson Caldwell officially on the case, Devin filed a lawsuit against Meredith Vaughn and the police department. The story spread fast, fueled by the video evidence and the blatant injustice of it all. Social media erupted. Parking lot justice started trending. News outlets picked up the case, replaying the footage, dissecting every second of how a man doing nothing wrong ended up in handcuffs while his attacker walked free. Within days, activists, lawyers, and community leaders were demanding action. The lawsuit wasn't just about Devin anymore. It was about every time this had happened before and been ignored. Meredith Vaughn suddenly wasn't so smug anymore. Her businesses faced backlash, customers boycotted, and reporters camped outside her house. As for Officer Trent, the department launched an internal investigation. His record wasn't as clean as he wanted people to believe. But for Devin, it wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. Still, as the case moved forward, a deep exhaustion settled in. He had become a symbol of resilience. But he was also just a man, one who had been humiliated, wrongfully accused, and forced to fight for a justice that should have been his without question. As he sat in his apartment, scrolling through the thousands of messages of support, he realized the truth. Winning this fight wouldn't erase the scars. But maybe, just maybe, it would stop the next one from happening. The case gained traction, drawing national attention. Devin became more than just a man who had been wrongfully arrested. He became a symbol of a much larger fight. His story echoed across news outlets, social media, and panel discussions. Everyone had an opinion. Some people called him brave. Others called him a troublemaker. Devin wasn't interested in being either. He hadn't asked to be at the center of a movement. He had just wanted lunch. As the weeks passed, he found himself pulled into a whirlwind of interviews, legal meetings, and community gatherings. Maya kept telling him, "You're making a difference." And maybe he was. But the weight of it all, the expectations, the pressure, was suffocating. The lawsuit moved forward. Meredith Vaughn's reputation crumbled. Officer Trent was suspended. But was that justice? Would justice erase the humiliation of standing in that parking lot, handcuffed while his attacker smirked? Would justice silence the voice in the back of his mind, reminding him that next time it could be worse? One evening, he sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through comments on a video of his arrest. He saw people sharing their own experiences, their own pain, different names, different cities, same injustice. His phone buzzed, a message from Emma Caldwell. You fought for yourself, but you also fought for so many others. Thank you. Devin stared at the screen for a long moment before setting the phone down. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a fighter. But if his story could stop this from happening to someone else, maybe that was enough. Devin Carter's story is not just his own. It's a reality faced by countless people every day. Bias, injustice, and the abuse of power continue to shape experiences in ways many choose to ignore. But stories like this bring truth to light. If you believe in accountability, fairness, and the fight for real justice, let your voice be heard. Share this video. Leave a comment. Tell us your thoughts. And if you want to see more stories that challenge injustice and spark real conversations, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Your support keeps the fight alive. Together, we make change happen.